we'll get started then. Just conscious of time. Thank you, Stan, for joining me today, and continuing our review of the book Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, celebrated author. I've several of her books. I'm a big fan of hers, and love listening to her talking. I think she's got a very fun way of presenting, and she tells such authentic, vulnerable stories that you could really relate to. And so the subtitle of the book is How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. Just another one of these books in our series of distilling wisdom from books, with the aim of helping us to create a better life by putting some of these principles into practice in our lives. So the title Daring Greatly came from the speech by President Teddy Roosevelt, the Citizenship in a Republic speech that he gave in Paris back in 1910. And he talked about the critic, and the critic doesn't count. It's the man who's in the arena, daring greatly. So that's where the title came from. Daring greatly is what counts. Having courage and being willing to be vulnerable. Now, we've covered the introduction and the first 4 chapters thus far in our previous recordings. I won't go a lengthy review of those again today. We'll get straight into chapter 5, which is cultivating, or it's called Mind the Gap, cultivating change and closing the disengagement divide. You been to London, Stan?
No.
On the London Underground, as you're getting off the train or onto the train, an automated voice goes, "Mind the gap." And it's about that gap between the edge of the train and the beginning of the train platform. And you'd have to have a very small foot, I think, but people have somehow managed to get their foot trapped in between on occasion. There was one in Perth, actually, in Australia, famously.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You see that video, and the whole crowd had to help push the train, literally push it up at an angle so this guy could be released from he was pinned between the train and the platform. Did you remember seeing that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that on the news.
It was quite a famous video clip. I think it went viral. Okay, that's not a position you want to find yourself in, is it? Squashed between the train and the platform.
No, I don't. So.
All right, so minding the gap is a daring strategy. We have to pay attention to the space between where we're actually standing and where we want to be. In that particular case, the edge of the platform and the train. But it's a metaphor, if you like, for where we want to be in our life. And are we what's the gap between where we are now and where we would like to be? So she goes on to talk about strategy versus culture. And I like these definitions. Strategy is the game plan, or the detailed answer to the question, what do we want to achieve and how are we going to get there? And that applies whether it's in business or life or project teams or school groups, whatever. Culture, on the other hand, is less about what we want to achieve and more about who we are. And she quotes some organizational development pioneers, Terence Steele and Alan Kennedy, who explained it like this: culture is the way we do things around here. And that's a good way of putting it, I think, especially when you're talking about small business. It's very handy to engage people in your culture, to get them to think the same way about the way we approach things in business. Certainly what I've always tried to do with my staff is to get them to understand it from my perspective, what we're trying to achieve. And then if they all think the same way, then hopefully we apply the same kind of logical reasoning to any problem solving that we have to do. So Brené goes on to say that she can tell a lot about culture and values of a group, family, or organization by asking these 10 questions. So number 1, what behaviors are rewarded or punished? Where and how are people actually spending their resources? time, money, and attention. 3, what rules and expectations are followed, enforced, and ignored? 4, do people feel safe and supported, talking about how they feel and asking for what they need? 5, what are the sacred cows? Who is most likely to tip them? Who stands the cows back up? Number 6, what stories are legend and what values do they convey? I had an image of someone lifting a cow off the ground in my mind. Number 7, what happens when someone fails, disappoints, or makes a mistake? 8, how is vulnerability perceived? That is, uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. 9, how prevalent are shame and blame, and how are they showing up? And number 10, what's the collective tolerance for discomfort? Is the discomfort of learning, trying new things, and giving and receiving feedback normalized, or is there a high premium put on comfort, and how does that look? Well, that's quite a list, isn't it? Stan, you're frozen on my screen there at the moment. Are you still hearing me? You're still with me there? And she says the power of these questions is their ability to shed light on the darkest areas of our lives. Well, I'll press on. So, good morning, Jules. Welcome to the call. We are working our way through chapter 5 of Daring Greatly, which is Mind the Gap, Cultivating Change, and Closing the Disengagement Divide. Jules has messaged me in the chat there and let me know it's all good your end. All right, well, I'll press on. Sorry, it just means that I'm not going to get to hear your feedback very easily. It might pick up. It might pick up. All right. So we're just talking about the difference between strategy and culture. So culture, she says that the power of these, there's 10 questions that she uses that we've just read out there, telling a lot about the culture and values of a group, family, or organization. She said the power of these questions is their ability to shed light on the darkest areas of our lives, disconnection, disengagement, and our struggle for worthiness, which we've covered in previous chapters. But not only do these questions help us understand the culture, they surface the discrepancies between what we say and what we do, or between the values we espouse and the values we practice. And she says her dear friend Charles Kiley uses the term aspirational values to describe the elusive list of values that reside in our best intentions on the wall of our cubicle, at the heart of our parenting lectures, or in our company's vision statement. It's a bit like the old New Year's resolutions that are coming up, isn't it? We all have these aspirations of how we would like our life to be and how we would like things to be in our business. But do we actually deliver? Do we walk the talk, as it is? And sometimes that can be an uncomfortable, a confrontational question to ask ourselves. Are we actually doing what we say we're going to do? So she talks about the disengagement divide and some of the underlying issues that cause disengagement. She said politics is a great, albeit painful, example of social contract disengagement. Again, where politicians don't behave very well, they don't really set great examples. They're always ridiculing each other and behaving badly. And you know, she says if we behave the way some of the politicians do, we get fired in our jobs, or we get shut down in our businesses. Religion, another example of that social contract disengagement, where people are preaching values, but are they actually living them? So this was an interesting one. When religious leaders leverage our fear and our need for more certainty by extracting vulnerability from spirituality and turning faith into compliance and consequences, the old fire and brimstone story, rather than teaching and modeling how to wrestle with the unknown and how to embrace mystery, the entire concept of faith is bankrupt on its own terms. Wow. She says the gap starts here. We can't give people what we don't have. Who we are matters immeasurably more than what we know or who we want to be. So that's what she calls the value gap, or the disengagement divide, is that space between our practiced values, what we're actually doing, thinking and feeling, and our aspirational values, what we want to do, think and feel. Well, none of us are perfect, are we? We all have things that we would aspire to do. We might have the aspirational values. She gives some examples here, the aspirational values of honesty and integrity. Who wouldn't like to feel that they're honest and have integrity? We all do, don't we? But our practice values might be rationalizing and letting things slide. Great example of mum telling her kids that honesty and integrity are important, but then when somebody undercharges her at the checkout, does she go back to the store and say, oh, you didn't charge me for this? Do any of us do that? Well, that's a question for you, isn't it? Sometimes you might think that you need to. Other times you think, they're a big company, they can afford it. Their own stupid fault for not charging me. Which do you go with? And does doing that make you a dishonest person? Or does it erode your integrity? Very personal questions that each of us must answer. Number 2, she asks,
Depends on whether you notice that they've undercharged you.
well, that's true. If you don't notice, you're none the wiser.
Like, so like if you order, that should come to $15.
Yeah, if you genuinely don't notice, then obviously there's no, your honesty is
shopping trolley. Like sometimes I wouldn't have noticed.
And then the same as if you don't notice you've been overcharged until you get paid either. You run back down you do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm only getting about half of what you're saying here because the internet's just so bad today. I don't know what's going on. I'm just wondering whether it might be worth stopping the meeting and restarting just to see if I can get a better connection. Would you guys like to try that? If I just I'll stop the meeting and restart it, and then if you can just log back in again, we'll see if it improves it. I think it's worth a try. All right. Sorry about that.
This is the new meeting in Swahili.
Well, when you hear the recording, that's what it sounds like. I mean, what did she just say? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, wherever. Now it's gone.
These things happen.
Go back.
Hang on, you get my coffee.
All right, it's all good. We soldier on. We work through these little issues. All right. So number 2 was aspirational values, respect and accountability. The practice value might be that fast and easy is more important. So yeah, there's a story about dad saying boys will be boys rather than telling them how they should each talk to each other and behave with each other. Number 3, aspirational values, gratitude and respect. Practiced values, teasing, taking for granted and disrespect. Number 4, aspirational values, setting limits. And the practice value, rebellion and cool are important. Well, what's the difference between that and when you have your values aligned? If your aspirational values are emotional connection and honored feelings, and your practice values are emotional connection and honored feelings, then you're in alignment and everything's good. Woohoo! And it does feel good when your values are in alignment with what you're actually practicing, because we all get that little voice, don't we? Like if somebody undercharges you at the checkout, just as an example, do you ever have that inner little battle where you go, oh, should I say something? I should really go back and tell them, shouldn't I? Can I be bothered to go back into the shop now for a $2 overcharge or whatever it is? It might be a small amount. Here's my golden rule on that one. If it's a small family business and I know it's going to make a difference to them, I would go back and give them money. So look, you didn't charge me for this. If it's one of the big companies, I just think they've got a shrinkage budget. It's bad luck. my win, and that's me being honest and upfront about when it's okay to be dishonest. Is that being dishonest? Everyone's got their own boundary level, haven't they? Can you set a 100% honesty level and say that I am always honest and have integrity in all things all the time? if you can.
I think a lot of it depends on whether you notice it. You know, like if you got 3 items and you suddenly realise, you know, they haven't charged you for one, it's easier than, hey, I've got a whole shopping trolley.
Oh yeah, I'm
Because I
not saying.
wasn't really noticing it then.
I think there's a difference between that and, so we've all got these sliding scales, haven't we? Sliding scales of what's acceptable and what's not. If you walked out with the whole shopping trolley and went, oh damn, I forgot to pay. Have you ever done that when you walked out of a shop and actually forgotten to pay? I mean, that can happen quite easily.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't recall any times I haven't paid.
Yeah, the way they set the shops up now, where you've got to, you know, go through an obstacle course to get out.
Yeah. What I
but
don't
yeah.
like is the way that, it's an aside, but the Kmart stores where they have the checkouts in the middle of the store. That makes no sense to me, because then surely that must be inviting shoplifting, because people then got to walk halfway through the store with goods and kind of show the person on the front door that they've paid for them. I would have thought that would make the shoplifter's life a lot easier to hide things. And
well, I think that you know, the way Kmart's always been set out is you didn't have to go through the checkout to get out.
Yeah, right.
Right. So it gives them an excuse to check everyone's bags on the way out without upsetting people.
Yes,
having the checkout in the middle.
that's a good argument.
Target's checkouts are at the front, and they still check everybody in and out of the store.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is what she's talking about, is this gap between our perceived or our aspirational value and what we actually practice. You know, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And she said that really minding the gap is a daring strategy. We have to pay attention to the space between where we're actually standing and where we want to be. We're the only ones who can set those boundaries for ourselves, really. It's a personal choice. When is it acceptable? If you find some money, do you go out of your way to try and find out who's dropped it, who's lost it? Or do you pick it up and go, oh, win for me?
That's a win. That's a win, buddy.
Well, you know, if it's blowing down the street and there's no one around, what do you do?
Yeah, well, that's true. What if it's in a wallet? If you find somebody's wallet?
Well, I think.
Well, wallet's different, because now I'm looking for ID.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always remember an example I had at the Backpackers where somebody was using we had a room for internet. We had computers in this room opposite the office, and I went in there just to check the room, and I found a wallet lying there, and there was obviously I opened it to see who it belonged to. There was over $1,000 in cash in this wallet. Now I could have easily pocketed that, got rid of the wallet, and gone win for me, right? But the guy came back. He realized that he'd left his wallet behind. He'd driven off. He'd left the building and wasn't ever coming back. He was driving on to another capital city in Australia. But he must have got part of the way down the road and thought, I've lost my wallet. Where is it? And he retraced his steps. The last time he could remember it was in the internet room. So he came back into the office and said, oh, did anyone find my wallet? And I said, yes, it's your lucky day. Here it is. And all the money's still in it. Don't worry about it. And I gave it to him, and he just grabbed it and went, oh, good, and just turned around and walked off. And I thought, he didn't even say thank you. or he didn't even check that the money was still there. He just trusted that it was, but he didn't acknowledge the fact that
when he went outside.
$1,000 in cash in the wallet. And I was quite shocked that he didn't even say, oh, thanks so much for that. You know? Because I would.
I think you sort of thank you. So yeah.
Got their different standards. Maybe he was in shock at finding it, and he was just so pleased.
Maybe.
But it stuck in my mind that, you know, if I ever lost anything, and somebody finds it for me, I'd be, oh, thanks so much for doing that. You know. Oh, there we go. If it had been another backpacker that found it, I have to wonder, would it all still have been there? Not that I'm saying that all backpackers are dodgy, because I remember backpackers.
Do you know that happened to me once? This guy had there was 3 of us there, and lost his wallet and he got all shitty and he drove off. And when he drove off, his wallet was under the car. And the girl next to me turns around and she goes, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to ring him and tell him we found it." She's obviously going, you want to go halves or whatever. Just the
to the pub
situation.
Well, you could argue, would that depend on what the character of the person was like? If he was an arse and you thought he deserved to lose that.
I couldn't.
No, I couldn't do it. I would be the same as you, Jules. I would have to call him and say, "We found your wallet." But you can understand why somebody might have a different approach. And then you look at also, does your present circumstance affect those sorts of decisions? In other words, if you are in a family who's poverty stricken at the time, so you can understand in the likes of the favelas of Brazil, or the poor neighborhoods where someone put in that same situation might want to do the right thing, but they might think, well, it's free money for me and my family, and that makes the difference between us eating today or not. Does that change your rationale? I think you'd have to say that it would. I mean, we have that survival instinct in us, and so then people justify it, don't they? Yeah. Or would you have such a high value that you could override your present circumstances and go, no, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to give that wallet back to somebody. It's an interesting question, isn't it?
It's like that movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy. They bet how long it would take the rich guy to start stealing once he's lost everything.
Yes, very good movie. Very good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, so food for thought. No judgments here. I think we'll have these sliding scale boundaries on things like that. And if you are one of those people who has absolutely no, I always 100% do always the right thing, I would say, have you ever taken a pen from a workplace situation? Or that's one of the most common ones, isn't it? Someone, oh, I've got your pen, I didn't realize. You go back and give the pen back. Well,
depends. Are they nice pens?
There we go. Mind the gap, Stan. Mind the gap. All right. So moving on. Anyone else want to say anything on that chapter before we move on past that? It's food for thought, isn't it? That one. All right. Chapter 6. Disruptive engagement. Daring to rehumanize education and work. Have we had a chance to read it or listen to it? You don't know? Can't remember?
I can't remember it.
It's hard to know when you're listening to the audiobook where you're up to. All right. To reignite creativity, innovation, and learning, leaders must rehumanize education and work. This means understanding how scarcity is affecting the way we lead and work, learning how to engage with vulnerability, and recognizing and combating shame. Make no mistake, honest conversations about vulnerability and shame are disruptive. The reason that we're not having these conversations in our organizations is that they shine light in dark corners. Mysterious, hey? It's true, isn't it? Once you become aware of a conversation or you've brought to light an issue, sometimes you can't put it back in the box, can you? It's like it's now out there. We've talked about it. What's been said cannot be unsaid. Sometimes you might wish that you hadn't said it, but you've blurted something out in the heat of the moment and then gone, ooh, now I've got to live with that because I've said it and they've heard it. They've heard me say it.
Foot in mouth disease.
Yes. I always joke that my wife opens her mouth to change feet. Because Jo would have her heart on her sleeve. She'll tell you what she thinks and then go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But that's one of the things I kind of like about it sometimes as well. And sometimes it really irritates me. Because I'm like, oh no, you didn't just say that, did you? Well. So Brené says she wants to clarify what she means by a leader. A leader is anyone who holds her or himself, even allows a him there, himself accountable for finding potential in people and processes. The term leader has nothing to do with position, status, or number of direct reports. I wrote this chapter for all of us, parents, teachers, community volunteers, and CEOs, anyone who is willing to dare greatly and lead. Are you willing to dare greatly and lead, people?
Sounds
Yes,
good.
of course you are.
Are there any wallets?
The challenge of leading in a culture of never enough. We talked about that we wake up in the morning going, I didn't get enough sleep, I haven't got enough money, I haven't got enough time. There's not enough, the scarcity culture. What's the most significant barrier to creativity and innovation? She asked one of her friends. Well, if you have the fear of introducing an idea and being ridiculed, laughed at, and belittled, if you're willing to subject yourself to that experience, and if you survive it, then it becomes the fear of failure and the fear of being wrong. These are big things, aren't they, that can stifle learning and creativity if we're afraid of how we're going to be judged or how we're going to be embarrassed or made fun of. It can hold us back from coming up with new ideas, putting things forward. We talked about that in previous chapters. So learning and creating are inherently vulnerable. There's never enough certainty. People want guarantees. Well, sometimes as a leader, you can, in a meeting, you can say, look, no idea is a bad idea. No idea is a stupid idea. Just come up with whatever you think. We'll brainstorm it. You know, that's the thing, brainstorming. You just throw ideas out there and then you might go, yeah, well, that's not going to work. We might say no idea is a stupid idea, but if someone does come up with a really stupid idea, we can't help ourselves laughing sometimes, can we? And that doesn't go down very well. And it's not going to really encourage the person to come up with new ideas next time if you've sort of laughed at their suggestion. There's something we've got to, again, mind the gap. We've got to be aware that we have to acknowledge all ideas and input. We can explain why it's not going to work, or you know how it's not practically possible, but we've got to avoid the temptation to laugh at people or belittle them for coming up with what we might all think is a really stupid idea. But if we've asked people for ideas, we've got to accept that not all of them are going to be sensible ones. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the old saying, isn't it? There's no, what is it? There's no stupid questions.
Yes, absolutely. And well, you know, it's funny. I've had that test recently, because I've just trained some new staff, and I always say that to my staff. I always say, look, if you've got a question, there is no such thing as a stupid question. I'd rather you ask what might seem like a stupid question than make a stupid mistake. And then what did I get the following week? Is some really stupid questions. And I was thinking, well, I did ask for them. It's my own fault. But then I thought, no, well, you know, step back. Is it stupid if you don't know? It's not, is it? And it's better that they ask. But then something you think, really? You couldn't have figured that out for yourself? But you have to stand by what you said.
On the training.
You have to stand by what you said, don't you? You have to go. Well, bear in mind that I'm training people in a different language, so there is the language barrier there as well, and that's a big factor.
Yeah.
Because you think that you've explained something, they've nodded and smiled and said, yes, I understand, and then they've come back and asked a question that you think, well, they obviously didn't understand, did they? Or they wouldn't be asking that question. But that unfortunately that happens with people who speak perfect English too. So you know, it's the barrier between what you think you've communicated and what people have actually heard and received. And sometimes that could be just because they zoned out. You know, they were thinking about the last thing you said, so they weren't really listening to the thing you just said. Did anyone just hear what I just said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, nodding and smiling. I can believe that you heard.
Nodding and smiling, yeah.
So
Smile
recognizing,
and wave, boys. Smile and wave.
recognizing and combating shame. Shame works like termites in a house. It's hidden in the dark behind the walls and constantly eating away at our infrastructure until one day the stairs suddenly crumble. That's a great metaphor, isn't it? Only then do we realize that it's only a matter of time before the walls come tumbling down. In the same way that a casual walk around our house won't reveal a termite problem, a stroll through an office or school won't reveal a shame problem necessarily. But we do see examples of a teacher berating a student or an employee or manager, a manager berating an employee. There's the worst possible examples when you see in a workplace where a manager is belittling one of the staff in front of other staff. It's really bad. It should happen if you're going to talk to somebody and dress them down, you should do it in private, really away from the rest of the group, so you're not embarrassing them. And yet managers do it time and time again to try and get a message across, or to maybe to reinforce their own power. And she says, signs that shame has permeated the culture. Blaming, gossiping, favoritism, name calling, and harassment are all behavior cues that shame has permeated a culture. And it's more obvious when it becomes an outright management tool. Any thoughts on that, people? She goes on to say that an estimated 54 million American workers, 30% of the US workforce, and this was written 10 years ago, have been bullied at work. There is an increase in the amount of bullying at work, or certainly that you hear about cases of bullying at work, and people quitting their jobs or becoming depressed or developing other mental health issues as a result of workplace bullying. And it's become a big thing. My daughter actually changed schools when she was a teenager because she was being bullied by some of the other kids in the school, and she got that bad that at one point she went, I don't want to go back to that school anymore. And she moved across from one high school to another, which I always think was because she was beautiful and, you know, the other girls were jealous. That's my story as a father. But you just don't know, do you? People do get bullying, and there's so much bullying on the internet nowadays as well, with, you know, cyberbullying, social media. The keyboard warriors. Shame can only rise so far in any system before people disengage to protect themselves. When we're disengaged, we don't show up, we don't contribute, and we stop caring. And you can see that in a workplace where a boss is using those kind of tactics. People just like, well, if that's what you think of me, if you're going to embarrass me all the time, then I'm not going to come up with any ideas. You know, it becomes a sort of a passive aggressive type situation. People do just zone out and go, well, I'll just do what you say, exactly what you say, and then if it's a mess, well, that's your own fault, you know. Even if I can see that I could come up with an idea that would change it, I'm not going to. You do see that happening. So she put this quote from Bill Gates about one of her friends was a teacher and was being embarrassed by the newspaper publishing the performance payments that the teachers had received, which I'm staggered that would be the case, but that's what they did in America. And Bill Gates put a comment about that it was wrong, you know, that we need to develop a systematic way to help teachers get better. That's the most powerful idea in education today. And the surest way to weaken it is to twist it into a capricious exercise in public shaming. And then she posted this, Brené posted this quote by Bill Gates online, and then got a lot of feedback from people. And one teacher, a veteran teacher, replied, "For me, teaching is about love. It is not about transferring information, but rather creating an atmosphere of mystery and imagination and discovery. When I begin to lose myself because of some unresolved pain or fears, or the overpowering feelings of shame, then I no longer teach. I deliver information, and I think I become irrelevant then." I thought that was a really interesting quote, because teaching is not just about disseminating information, is it? It's about inspiring people to want to know more, to want to educate themselves, to want to improve their lives. That's what good teachers do, isn't it? And our system is kind of set up to enable students to just pass exams, to just be able to tick the boxes, to get the score, to get the piece of paper that they need to go and do the job. But really, what we want more of is people to be inspired to want to be better. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think. What do you reckon, Mr. Homeschooler? You reckon your level of learning and teaching going to be higher than what you would get going to school?
Well, a lot of the stuff now can be done online anyway, and a lot of it is what you're learning at school in 6 hours, we're doing in less than 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you've got the scope to well, you're following your own interests as well. So you're not just stuck going, hey, I'm here, or, you know, I mean, it's kind of like my son's kind of interested in space. So we've done like, you know, watch the rocket launch, and several times it got cancelled, so there was nothing to do. But then they give you all this information about, you know, what the mission's going on, and, you know, what are they doing, and how long's it taking, and, you know, like they give you all the science of it as well, sort of thing. And we just finished watching the documentary about the Opportunity rover that landed on Mars. They thought it would only go for 90 days, and it went for 15 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's quite interesting about, you know, how they got it landed and done all stuff, and, you know, like, and they put it with balloons, big balloons and parachutes and all sorts of stuff. And then, like, where did it end up? They put 2 down at the same time.
You just raised an interesting point there too, Stan, and that is how the way that kids learn nowadays is because we're all more used to learning through watching videos, through watching documentaries, TV programs that jump around and that keep us engaged and entertained. Whereas a teacher standing in front of a classroom talking, people zone out, don't they?
Well, I'm a big believer of what most people would term as alternative learning. So Montessori, Waldorf, and Steiner, where it's a lot of hands-on visual learning at your own pace sort of stuff, which is actually the way everybody learns. Because like an attentive adult that's interested in a subject's actual attention span is 17 minutes. And you would have known this as a presenter when you're doing stuff. And I know when I peeked behind the curtains at Jeff and Kane and stuff like that, where they said, you know, like, we change tactics, or we get people to raise their hands or stand up or do something every 15 to 17 minutes, because otherwise you've lost everybody.
Yeah.
You've lost everybody, not just one person. You've lost everybody.
Yeah, that's a scary thought, isn't it?
It's not a long time, is it?
Yeah, and Jeff was big on that. Like, I know that when we were crewing once, he was talking about he'll sometimes walk across the room, and he does it deliberately, and which way he's walking depending on what he's talking about. But then he'll stop at certain paces, because it'll, like, you know, the person who's playing on their phone suddenly is like, oh, Jeff's standing right in front of me, I better do some work. But captures their attention again, sort of thing.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And the other one I remember, now you mentioned that, Stan, was I think it was Jeff was saying that you touch an audience member, you know, in an appropriate place, obviously, but, you know, you might touch them on their arm or shoulder or something, and when you do that, you're actually making a connection sort of mentally with the whole audience. They all feel as if you've reached out and touched them. So you're keeping that engagement. So there's a lot of presentation techniques like that they apply to keep people engaged. So yeah, thanks, Stan. That's really good. Let's move on. The blame game. The best way to think about the relationship between shame and blame. If blame is driving, Shame is riding shotgun. In organizations, schools, and families, blaming and finger pointing are often symptoms of shame. So they say that people are a reflection of ourselves, aren't they? So, because how we see the world through our values and through our way of making sense of it. Cover-up culture. Related to blame is the issue of cover-ups. Cover-up cultures depend on shame to keep folks quiet. When the culture of an organization mandates that it's more important to protect the reputation of a system and those in power than it is to protect the basic human dignity of individuals or communities, you can be certain that shame is systemic. Money drives ethics and accountability is dead. Wow. Well, you think there are a lot of incidents that are covered up in governments, universities, retail stores, all across the world. People want to protect the organization. And I think part of that's because we're in such a litigious society as well. You know, people are always looking for somebody to blame. If you walk through a shopping center and you trip over a box, it's my own fault. I should have looked where I was walking. You know, I could have seen that box and avoided it. No, it's like, well, who left that box there? It's somebody else's fault that I tripped over that box. You know, can I sue someone for this? It's the world we're in, isn't it? All right. We can't control the behavior of individuals. However, we can cultivate organizational cultures where behaviors are not tolerated and people are held accountable for protecting what matters most, human beings. Just an interesting aside on that. There's been a lot of reports coming out of Ukraine that Russian soldiers have tortured, committed acts of aggression, brutality against, in many cases, innocent civilians. President Zelensky has been getting a lot of the Russian soldiers to surrender by promising that anyone who surrenders will be treated well. And then they're taking videos of these soldiers who have been captured, saying, well, that's actually really good. They looked after us really well. They've given us hot food. They've given us, you know, somewhere to sleep. We're warm. We're comfortable. We weren't like that in our own army. We weren't getting fed properly. We weren't, you know, so they've used it. They've turned it into a tactic to persuade Russian soldiers that it's a good idea to surrender, because unlike the way you've treated our civilians, we're not going to do that. We're going to treat you well. It's kind of the Geneva Code, going back to the Second World War, you know, how you handle prisoners who have surrendered speaks a lot about those values and the way that you would like to conduct yourself, rather than there would be every reason to think that some of those Ukrainian soldiers receiving the Russian prisoners would maybe want to mete out some of their own punishment on them, you know, a bit of an eye for an eye kind of thing. But by taking the moral high ground and actually treating people with respect, that these are other human beings, most of whom probably don't even want to be here, they've been ordered to be here, will make the world a better place. I just thought it was interesting. I was watching this documentary, self-teaching at my own pace, Stan, learning about what was going on in the world, and I just thought that was a fascinating kind of insight into the, you know, that you win people over more by being kind and by being upholding the higher values than you do by threatening people and being brutal. So the 4 best strategies for building shame resilient organizations are: 1, supporting leaders who are willing to dare greatly and facilitate honest conversations about shame and cultivate shame resilient cultures. 2, facilitating a conscientious effort to see where shame might be functioning in the organization and how it might even be creeping into the way we engage with our co-workers and students. 3, normalizing is a critical shame resilient strategy. Leaders and managers can cultivate engagement by helping people know what to expect. What are common struggles? How have other people dealt with them? What have your experiences been? 4, training all employees on the differences between shame and guilt and teaching them how to give and receive feedback that fosters growth and engagement. A daring greatly culture is a culture of honest, constructive, and engaged feedback. Without feedback, there can be no transformative change. But giving feedback can be just as confrontational as receiving it. How many times have you ever had to have a difficult discussion with somebody and give them feedback, whether it's your spouse or your children or the next door neighbor or an employee if you've been a boss? She said in her research, sorry, Jules, yeah.
I was going to say, I always say, you know, I'll let you know if you're doing something wrong, because I'd say, you know, because I would like to know if I'm doing something wrong. The best way to learn is by doing and mistakes. Hopefully, they didn't keep saying you fucked that up.
Yeah, I think also
French. This is a recording.
That's all right. I think also that this is a good point you raised there. The way the words that we use can make a big difference, and certainly when you're giving people that feedback, I realized as I read this chapter that it's important to give some feedback, even if it is, let's say, negative feedback, but really it's constructive feedback to get them to do things the way you want it done, which could be perceived as negative, but is actually a positive reinforcement of what we want, the way we want it done. And if you do it this way, next time you're doing it the right way. It's better to do that than to not give any feedback at all, because if you don't give people any feedback, they think you don't really care what they do.
Yeah.
And a good choice of words just there, because the word feedback is different from, hey, constructive criticism. Like, it's not very constructive, but feedback is different.
Yeah,
Well,
true. And they say if you're going to say you're doing something wrong, then you should finish with, but you've done that well. So
the praise sandwich.
yeah, that's what they call it, isn't it?
Yes, I really like the work you do here. It's a shame you've completely stuffed this up, and in future,
No, wrong order.
But on the whole, you've done really well.
Yeah. You're picking it out really fast.
Yeah, that was something that I was taught as a young training manager at 18, the praise sandwich. People are desperate for feedback. We want to grow, but we also need to learn how to give feedback in a way that inspires growth and encouragement. So you want to make people feel that they're learning and improving, and if they can just do this one or two things slightly better and do them this way, then they'll be even better. So then they want to live up to that, don't they?
Yep, and then you'll get a gold star.
Yeah. I must start giving out stars to my staff. I do. I do in emojis, you know, but like little thank you symbols and things like that. The simple and honest process of letting people know that discomfort is normal, it's going to happen, why it happens and why it's important, reduces anxiety, fear, and shame. Periods of discomfort become an expectation and a norm. So we know that it might be uncomfortable to give feedback to somebody, but we need to get into the habit of doing it and accepting, yes, this might not feel very comfortable, but I do need to do it. And to warn people, if they're going to be giving feedback to people, you may at times feel uncomfortable doing it, but it is part of, you need to do it and they need to hear it. So that way we all improve. So teaching the people around us how to accept discomfort as part of growth. Right. I like this, the way we can change our own self-talk on these things. She says, I can beat myself up for being too controlling and micromanaging, or I can recognize that I'm very responsible, dependable, and committed to quality work. So the micromanaging issues don't go away, but by viewing them from a strengths perspective, I have the confidence to look at myself and assess the behaviors I'd like to change. Again, the gap between who we are and who we'd like to be. So vulnerability is at the heart of the feedback process. We have to risk the fact that we have to be vulnerable to give feedback, because someone might not take it very well. And they might think you're really having a go at them, but you're actually trying to help them improve. So we have to have honest engagement, and so the person giving the feedback has to risk that the person receiving it might not welcome it, but we have to still do it nonetheless. And the person has to receive it knowing that, well, it might be uncomfortable to hear this, but if I don't get my feedback, I won't know how to do things better in future. She talks about sitting on the same side of the table. If you want to give constructive feedback to somebody, don't do it across a barrier like a desk. Go and sit next to the person and be more.
And I think it was I think it was either that video or something else. I'm sure it was the same book where she talked about not in a meeting being ready, and in the meeting and then the meetings of no use. And I thought that's a really good way of kind of doing it.
Yeah.
Unless you're sitting there facing the same way, dealing with the same stuff as a part of as like a friend, more than as, you know, sitting across the desk sort of thing. I thought that was quite an interesting way.
Yeah, and there's
this
obviously every situation is different. There might be a need, like say for instance, the way an army captain disciplines a private is going to be different to a situation in a workplace where there's a small team of people. You know, but again, this comes a lot to your personality, and some leaders are more my way or the highway, and more, you know, direct about what they want, how they want it. Other people are more kind of, oh, I want to be a friend, I want to show you how to do this better. We've got different leadership styles, and sometimes the situation will dictate. We talked a lot about this, Stan, with personalities, didn't we? If you're the surgeon leading the operation and you need someone to put that clamp in to stop the bleeding, you've got to be directive and quick about it. Go, you quick, grab that clamp, get it there. You know, you've got time to go, now I really think it would be better going forwards that you move quicker to put this clamp here. You know, you've got to save a person's life. You've got to do things differently. Yeah,
but that's a different situation. But at the end, if you were prepared to sit down with the nurse and stuff like that, which side of the table are you on? As you were saying, unless you're prepared to sit next to them, then your meeting's of no use, really.
And I would always be willing to sit next to them. Not everyone thinks the same way.
But I thought that was quite interesting. She said, you know, like, you're not ready for the meeting unless you're ready to.
Yeah, that's a good point, Stan. If you
thought about which way they are.
You go into the meeting angry, you're not going to. You've got to be composed and calm, haven't you? If you're angry,
yeah, but like she was talking about, you're not ready for the meeting. You haven't thought about, you haven't thought about the other person. You haven't thought. As soon as you start thinking, how do I sit next to them and work through whatever we've got the problem, which is different from sitting across and just telling you off. Like you have to stop and think about, how do I work with the person that's opposite me? And I mean, if you're taking the surgeon, not necessarily in the operation, but afterwards, did you stop and think and go, like, does this person need more training, or, are they a slow person and they need they need to be put on a different job, or maybe, maybe they don't have a bed, maybe a 20-hour operation and everyone's tired or whatever, like that thinking process about person is
Yeah.
really good.
Yep, that's right. Thank you, Stan. All right. Well, a key part of all that of successful communication then is also making sure that you're being honest, not bullshitting, taking responsibility for your part in whatever that conversation is about. And rather than saying I don't know the answer, if you're in, like, I don't know, in a service situation and somebody asks you a question, rather than bullshitting and making something up, be honest and say, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. I'll get back to you, you know. So all communication really has that element of vulnerability, of uncertainty. And she goes on to say that success requires entrepreneurs to cultivate strong support networks and good mentors. That you're trying to establish this change of shifting from having the best idea or problem solving to being the best leader of people. The shift from controlling to engaging with vulnerability, taking risks and cultivating trust. And so she talks about the fact that a lot of people, Seth Godin, she quotes Seth Godin, leadership is scarce because few people are willing to go through the discomfort required to lead. And when you identify the discomfort, you found the place where a leader is needed. So when the conversation needs to happen, but it feels uncomfortable to have that conversation, that's when you find the leaders. Feedback, this just to conclude the chapter then, feedback is a function of respect. When you don't have honest conversations with us about our strengths and our opportunities for growth, we question our contributions and your commitment. Above all else, we ask that you show up, let yourself be seen, and be courageous. Dare greatly with us. So there you go. Disruptive engagement. Good chapter. Rehumanizing education and work. Taking a human approach. The old saying is treat people the way you'd like to be treated. But the new saying is treat people the way they'd like to be treated. So really being vulnerable enough to give that feedback, and in a constructive and human way. What do you think, people?
Well, how do you know how people want to be treated? You have to ask them.
Good point. Good point indeed. Well, I suppose if you're leading over a period of time, you get to know a bit about people and you get to understand the way they operate, the way they tick.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, Alex Ferguson, the Manchester United manager, you see some players need an arm around them, and other players need, you know, a bollocking. So he knew which personalities needed which. So he knew which player he could give a dressing down to. And in fact, he actually used to use public embarrassment in the dressing room. He'd single out a player and go, "You made a mess of this. You didn't do this right," knowing that the other players were going, "Oh, I didn't do it either." But he knew which personalities could handle it, and he knew which ones would. Like, for instance, one of his top players, Ryan Giggs, said the boss always knew that if he gave me tore a shred off me, I'd go out the next half in the halftime team talk. You know, if he told me off, so I'd go out in the second half and play even better because I'd want to prove him wrong. And that's exactly what the boss was trying to achieve. So personality management, you know, management of people, knowing how people tick, man management skills, person management skills, we have to say in our new world of political correctness.
Persons, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's moved us along quite well. We've got one that will be certainly dear to Stan's heart, I'm sure. Chapter 7, Wholehearted Parenting, will be going on to next week. And that's a reasonably large chapter. And then it goes on to final thoughts. So we can I think, finish off the book next week. You guys are available and up for it.
Cool.
So, you know what to do this week? Mind the gap. All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming along this morning and contributing. And sorry about the internet disturbances earlier on. Beyond my control, I'm afraid, but we got through it.
All good. Thanks, Tony.
Cheers. Bye for now.
Good day.